So I keep very few things from my childhood. I'm not sentimental when it comes to stuff. But there is one thing that I've held on to over the years, and it's this radio. So in probably 1979, 1980, for Christmas, my parents bought me this shortwave radio. And you have to understand the times in which I was living back then. This was the pre-internet age. This was also, if I remember correctly, pre-cable television around our home, where we had 3 stations plus PBS, but nobody liked PBS, so really you just had 3 stations. And so for me, as a 9 or 10-year-old kid, when I got this radio, it became, because I lived way far out in the middle of nowhere in West Texas, it became a portal to a much larger and different world than what I had had exposure to up to that point. I could pick up a radio station in South Africa. I could listen to Voice of America radio broadcasting from Munich. At nighttime, because of the way AM signals bounce across the atmosphere, I could pick up stations from all across America, all across the world, even truck drivers driving across the endless plains of Canada. I could pick up on this radio. This became for me a portal to a much larger world than what I could ever imagine. Now, I think you know where I'm going with this, because we pick up this, we pick up the Bible, and what it is, it's a portal not just to a much larger world, but to a much more eternal world than what we experience in the here and now. Particularly when it comes to the miracles of the Bible, and even more specifically when it comes to the miracles performed by Jesus, because what his miracles do, his miracles help us to tune in to his power, and when we understand Jesus' power, we also begin to grasp his identity. And so I'm doing this a little bit by memory this morning, but if you were to look at all the catalogs of Jesus' miracles, there'd be 35 total. And they break down into 4 categories. So the first category of miracles would be when Jesus countermands nature, when nature is acting as nature does in an unpredictable, uncontrollable way, and Jesus controls creation. So there's 9 of those miracles. Then there's 6 miracles where Jesus countermands Satan. Satan is doing what Satan does, destroying, deceiving, hurting people. And Jesus confronts the spiritual elements of the world. So 9 miracles where he deals with creation, 6 miracles where he deals with evil. Then there are 3 miracles where Jesus raises someone from the dead. He brings them back from beyond. But the bulk of miracles are in this last category. In fact, 17 of the 35 miracles is when Jesus brings about healing and wholeness. So you're going to find those miracles scattered all throughout the Gospels, but Luke chapter 8 is when you find a miracle in each one of those 4 categories. And I'm just going to say to the folks in the sound booth, I'm getting a little bit of feedback up here. I don't know if the rest of y'all can hear it, but I'm just hearing a little bit of feedback, so if we could address that, thank you. So in Luke chapter 8, we get these 4 kinds of miracles all represented. So here's what we're going to do. There's too much for us to handle in the limited time we have this morning. So I'm going to briefly walk through those first 2 miracles where Jesus deals with creation and deals with the demonic. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time on those last 2 miracles where Jesus brings back from the dead and restores people to health. So here's how this starts in Luke chapter 8, if you start around verse 22. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep, and a squall came down on the lake so that the boat was being swamped. So the Sea of Galilee, where they are, is 682 feet below sea level. So here you have the Mediterranean out here on the west coast of Israel. And as you go inland, the Sea of Galilee drops down 682 feet. And so what happens is the winds, strong winds coming off the Mediterranean, they hit the mountains that surround the Sea of Galilee and create this unpredictable weather pattern, this vortex that can come up out of nowhere on the Sea of Galilee. Kind of like when you stand on Detroit Avenue right in front of the church, all the wind in Tulsa seems to converge and come down Detroit Avenue right here. And it comes out of nowhere. And for something that's invisible, it's incredibly strong. And so when the disciples say a squall came down and they were about to be swamped, they had spent their life on the sea. They knew exactly what they were talking about. It's kind of like when I'm on an airplane, if the stewardess, if the flight attendant doesn't look nervous, I'm not nervous. But when they look nervous, I get nervous. The disciples, they knew storms. This had them nervous, and they were afraid of drowning in the Sea of Galilee. So I've been on the Sea of Galilee a handful of times. Fortunately, a storm has never come up. But the first time I was on the Sea of Galilee with a group from our church, there's 50 or so, we're in this boat, we're motoring out to the middle of the Sea of Galilee. I turn around, and in the cabin, and the person driving the boat at that moment was not the captain that we left with. My wife was driving the boat on the Sea of Galilee. I turn around, she's at the head of the boat steering it, and 4 words popped into my head. Jesus, take the wheel. Yeah. She did a great job. We all survived all that, but that's what the disciples do. This is even too much for us. And Jesus stills the storm, and there's this question that lingers. You get to the end of this episode, I know we're just briefly touching on it, but the disciples go, who is this guy? Who is this? Now just consider for a moment, let's ponder that question, because this is more than just Jesus controlling weather patterns. The very first picture we get of the universe in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 1, it said darkness covered the face of the deep. See, the first image we have of creation is like an uncontrollable ocean. And God said, let there be light. It's interesting to think about the only person who can control creation is the Creator. Who is this? But then there's a second snippet in the Older Testament dealing with water. What happens right after the Israelites come out of Egyptian slavery? Well, God takes them through a tumultuous sea. Through the sea, He makes a way of deliverance. So who is this? It kind of rings with the idea of, yes, Jesus might be the Creator, but Jesus is also the deliverer. Who is this? So this question just kind of hangs in the air a bit. And it says that Jesus and His disciples landed on the far shore. And as they land on the far shore where they were going, a demon comes running out of nowhere, and greeting is the wrong word. A man filled with demons intercepts Jesus. Now, there's some curious descriptions about this man that if we're not careful, we've read this so often, we just read right past these. Notice it says in verse 27, for a long time this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. So as he comes out to meet Jesus, he is completely naked. Now, why is that an important point? That's an important point because clothes give us a sense of identity. As we all know, sometimes we identify ourselves by the clothes that we wear. You say, well, I'm a white-collar worker or a blue-collar worker. You go into the hospital and a doctor is wearing a white coat. You go into church and you expect the pastor to wear a tie. Well, keep dreaming, right? Clothes establish a sense of identity. So when it says that he was naked, this man had lost any semblance of who he was. But notice it also says this, and again, it's one of those little interesting facts. If you go down to verse 29, many times the demon would seize him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken through the chains and was driven by the demon into solitary places. Not only was there demons on the inside of this man, but the villagers had taken him and chained him up. In other words, this man was a captive in every sense of the word. He was captive spiritually, and he was also a prisoner physically. Now, he would overwhelm those chains, but other people chained him up as well. in case you don't think that we deal with destructive elements in our world. C.S. Lewis writes this: many of us might not realize that we contain a zoo of lusts, a bedlam of ambitions, a nursery of fears, a harem of deep hatreds. My name is Legion. We have things too, spiritually and physically, that are happening to us in which we are in bondage. And the scene ends, and I know we're not spending too much time here, but the scene ends with the man clothed and sitting at Jesus' feet. That's the sign. When you sit at somebody's feet, that's a sign of discipleship. So I want you to get these two scenes together because they're meant to be read at the same time. Jesus is one who calms the storm, but also can calm the human spirit. So whatever you've got today that's going on around you, the chaos, the swirl of events, and whatever is going on inside of you, would you hear this? Jesus is the one and the only one who can bring peace. Peace to the storm, peace to our spirits. So today, if you were to get on a plane, about 48 hours from now, you could find yourself in Kodini, India. Right on the coast of India. Nothing very special about this town. 2,000 people live there. Beautiful beach, lush forest, simple village. Of the 2,000 people that live in this little Indian village, get this, 2,000 people, 400 of them are twins. 1/5 of the population. Some might call it paradise. I told you I'd be here all morning. They actually have nicknamed themselves Twin Town. And scientists from Germany and England have all come in trying to figure this out. Maybe there's something genetically happening, but even people who move in from other villages, they have twins. They have yet to identify what it is. And all the twins are healthy. There's no problems whatsoever. Just 1/5 of the population is twins. Now, they don't know what's causing that, but Luke loves twins. And notice throughout his gospel, we've talked about this before, he likes to pair things up. So here you have two twins. Jesus can control creation, and he can control the human heart, the storms and the spirit. He can control both. And then right on the other side of those two twins, there's two more twins. There's two more stories that are meant to be read together. In fact, you can't help but read these together because one story is embedded within the other. So here's the next set of twins, verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him. They were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. Remember back to when you had a 12-year-old. Picture their face. And imagine the desperation as a parent that you would have in this situation. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. Now that word crushed, I love little snippets like this. That word shows up one other time in Luke chapter 8. It's back when Jesus is talking about the parable of the soils and the wheat's coming up out of the ground, and the weeds grow up around the wheat and threatens to crush it. In other words, to squeeze the life out of him. So here, these people are crushing around Jesus. They threaten to squeeze the life out of him. And there was a woman there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. Now here's what I want you to notice next as we read this account. Verse 44, 45, 46, 47. They all use the same word. The same word shows up 4 times. Touched. Who touched me? Jesus, I skipped over this. Verse 44. She came up behind Jesus and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately the bleeding stopped. Who touched me? Jesus asked. When they'd all denied it, Peter said, "Are you kidding me? Master, people are crushing you." What do you mean, who touched you? But Jesus said, "Someone touched me." I know that power has gone out of me." Then the woman, saying that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet in the presence of all the people, and she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, "Daughter, go in peace." 4 times that word, touched. Whatever else it means to encounter the miraculous work of Jesus in our lives, what is required is personal contact, a personal decision. So this last trip when we went to Israel, God willing, we'll be able to go back someday safely. We went to Magdala. Magdala is now an archaeological site. If you remember Mary of Magdala, they've just discovered in the last few decades her hometown, and they're beginning some archaeological work. They found a synagogue, and there's already a church that's been built. Inside that church is this mural. Let's just sit on this first picture here for just a moment. Now, this is Luke chapter 8 put into a painting, but what I can't express to you this morning is the scale of this painting. So you see it on a screen, but imagine, if you would, the center panel here that contains the cross and 2 panels on either side. If you could imagine that, spanning the front of the church is this huge mural, literally at foot level. This is when she reaches out and touches Jesus. And I have a detail on the middle of this photo right there where she touches. I want you to notice the dirty, cracked feet. I want you to know the aged, weathered hand, the dirty fingernails. But she comes into contact. She touches Jesus. What she is experiencing is power that is way beyond anything she has ever experienced before. Who is this who can calm the storm, calm the human spirit, heal the body? Well, the woman wants to sneak away quietly. Jesus won't let her, because what he knows that she really needs is not just physical healing. She also needs personal liberation, to experience the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. Then the story continues. Verse 49, while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." What I want you to notice here, nothing throws Jesus. I don't know what you're dealing with right now, but Jesus doesn't get surprised or shocked by anything. This does not deter him. Whatever happens to you this week, whatever's going to happen to you in this season, it is no surprise to him. Don't be afraid. Most common command in the Bible. Just believe, and she'll be healed. Verse 51. When they arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." Can I give a little reflection here? So much of how we deal with life is based on who we're paying attention to. And Jairus had the choice. Would he pay attention to what other people were saying, or would he pay attention to Christ? So often, the only difference between fear and peace is who you're focusing on. Stop wailing. She is not dead, but asleep. Who is this that what to us is death, to him it's as simple as waking somebody up in the morning? They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone. So here's the big walk away. And I wish I could say it in a more profound way, but maybe it just doesn't need to be said in a more profound way. Maybe it just needs to be said for the fact and the truth that it is. tune in to a larger reality, a bigger world. Jesus is all powerful. He is all powerful over creation. He's all powerful over the spiritual. He's all powerful over life and death. He's all powerful over each one of us individually. Jesus is all powerful for all people. Jesus is all powerful for all people. And I don't normally do this, but let me read a paragraph and a half from David Garland's commentary on the Gospel of Luke, one of the primary resources that I'm using as I prepare for this. This paragraph says something more beautiful than what I could ever say it. Here's what he writes. The main characters, and he's talking about Jairus and the woman with the issue of blood. The main characters occupy opposite ends of the economic, social, and religious spectrum. Jairus is a prominent male leader in the community. The woman is nameless, and her weary disorder isolates her from community. Jairus has a household and has means. This woman has been made destitute for seeking treatment for her ailment. Jairus has honor and can approach Jesus directly with this plea of help. But this woman has no honor, no intercessors, and must, she thinks, approach Jesus in a secretive manner from behind. The two characters share only one thing in common: their desperate desire for healing and their belief that Jesus has power to provide. Their faith is demonstrated by their hoping when all seems hopeless. Jesus is all powerful for every single one of us, for all of us, no matter who you are, what you've done, where you find yourself in life. He's all powerful for all of us. And at the end of his ministry, Jesus would find himself at a table in which he would invite people from all kinds of backgrounds to come and sit with him and to receive from him the ultimate miracle, to receive symbols of his body and his blood that he was about to give for the salvation of every individual on this planet who would open their hearts and lives to Christ, who would confess and repent. There is forgiveness for all of us. And so let us come to the table as well. I'm going to pray for us here in just a moment, and then we're going to move into a time of singing a simple hymn and taking communion. I do like to point out at this point, you do not have to be a Baptist or a member of this church in order to receive communion. If you're a follower of Jesus, you are invited around the table because Jesus is all powerful for all of us. Pray with me. Jesus, thank you for your miracles. Thank you that you control creation as its creator, that you can control the demonic as its superior, that you can control health as the one who cures, and to you, death is nothing more than a simple night's sleep. And thank you that your power transcends even the strongest force that we have known outside of you. And so today, we imagine coming around that table in the evening as your disciples did on a night before you were betrayed, where you invited them to the table and you invited them to taste and see that the Lord is good. We worship you. We thank you that you are all powerful for all of us. In your name, amen.